bit more pointy-headed than perhaps they are. You were in Gaza last October, I believe.
I was. I was there with Christian Aid, myself, and two other parliamentarians, one from Labour and one from Fine Gael. At that time, Israel didn't have an offensive against Gaza, but it was blockading the area, and to see the impact of that was really quite frightening. I mean, if you think if people get their heads around what Gaza is actually like, you've 1.8 million people squeezed into an area half the size of Louth that's only 25 miles long, 3 miles wide. Half those people are children, and they're surrounded by a huge wall and barriers that they can't get in or out.
Just to give people a sense of, does that mean that there's effectively no open spaces there, that it's, you go over the border into Gaza and it's just for that entire, it's filled with people, that entire area? It's
one of the most densely populated places in the world. It's a tiny strip of land with, as I said, nearly 2 million people on it. A lot of those people are living in refugee camps. They don't have clean water. The UN has said that 99% of the water in Gaza is undrinkable. They just take the water directly from the sea. So when you turn on your tap in Gaza, it's just salt water that comes straight out. Most of the kids have anemia and things like that. They're living on international aid all the time since 2007, since the blockade has been going on. They get whatever rice the UN has left over at a particular point in time, or other provisions that are sent over, but it's not a proper diet. So as a result, the children are constantly sick, and it's been torture. It's a hell. And Gazans can't get in or out. And the most upsetting thing for me of watching the events over the last 2 weeks is knowing that 84, apart from there's been 600 Palestinians killed, many of them have been kids, but there are 84,000 people who've been forced to flee their homes but can't get out of Gaza. So this is unlike, usually when we watch conflicts, you see refugees fleeing over the border somewhere else, and people taking their kids to safety in a neighbouring country or another region. They can't do that in Gaza because it's like in one big prison camp. It's surrounded by walls on every side. There's nowhere for those people to go.
So where do you go?
They don't go anywhere. We saw 4 kids who were shot on the beach the other day. And kids that were just playing. There is nowhere to go. But families are just camped up in UN schools and things like that, just praying they won't be hit. But Israel has hit hospitals. It hit a home for disabled people last week and killed people there. They've killed babies. They've killed 70-year-old women. There is nowhere in Gaza. People just go to bed every night praying that they wake up the next morning. There's nowhere that's safe.
Yeah, and apparently some of the kids have been killed were playing on the roof of the building they lived in, because that's the only place, because they can't leave the building, so they go up and play on the roof, and that's the only place they have to go.
Yeah. And they get warnings. The Israelis sometimes they drop notes on the house saying you've 10 minutes to evacuate the house, but they've nowhere to go. They move to another area and then that area is bombed instead. It's really terrifying. It's really shocking.
When you were there, did you meet any people from Hamas?
No. We were there with Christian Aid. We were there to meet their partners, which are charitable organisations. So we met groups that work with children there who've been orphaned by the conflict, and all the psychological damage that has done to them. We met women's groups. We met an agricultural lobby. We were talking just about the fact that farmers can't farm their own land, like the Israelis have seized their land to create a buffer zone between Gaza and Israeli territory, so they can't farm that land. They can't fish their own seas. They've only been given a couple of miles along the Gaza coast that they can fish, and if they go outside that, they're shot at. So we've met groups to talk about all that, the economic impact on the people there. We also met some of the most interesting groups that we met were Israeli groups that are lobbying for an end to the occupation. People like Rabbis for Human Rights, ACRI, which is the Israeli version of the Irish Council for Civil Liberties, a human rights group, and a group called Breaking the Silence, who were former soldiers, former Israeli soldiers who were actually sent into the West Bank as conscripts, because they conscript young people at 17, 18 years of age, and were horrified by the instructions that they were given there in terms of firing on civilians, raiding people's houses for no reason, just to install them with a sense of fear and that they're constantly being watched. So those soldiers, on returning to Israel, decided to set up a group to make other Israelis aware of what's actually going on there. And they were really interesting and really brave people, because they've come under, as you can imagine, a lot of pressure from their own government for doing that. But they're just horrified by what they were being asked to do there in the name of Israel.
But was it your sense that if most Israelis were aware of these kind of things, they'd give a damn one way or the other? As far as they're concerned, thousands of rockets are raining down upon them, and good enough for them.
Yeah, I mean, well, you've seen, I mean, there were horrific scenes on YouTube, and some of the journalists, CNN, BBC journalists were tweeting about it this week, of Israelis up on the hillside looking down at Gaza, cheering and things like that when there were bombs. I mean, obviously they're getting a lot of propaganda, and from my own experience, a lot of the people, Israelis who feel most strongly against people in Gaza and against Palestinians in the West Bank and in favour of what their country is doing, are people who've never actually been there, who are getting a view of events of what is happening there, and it's, you know, it's not the truth. And that's why I think groups like Breaking the Silence are so significant, to have Israeli groups who are working in Tel Aviv and elsewhere in Israel to try and actually give the Israeli people the truth, so they can make their own minds up. I mean, there's no, look, would condemn equally Hamas's operations there. They shouldn't be firing rockets at Israeli areas, but Israel's response has just been totally disproportionate. We've seen over the last 2 weeks 600 Palestinians killed and 20 Israelis. Most of the Palestinians were civilians. Only 2 of those Israelis were civilians. So, I mean, there's no balance there. You know, that's a completely disproportionate response.
But it seems like we've seen this before. It seems to be a pattern of events. Hamas launches a few rockets at the Palestinian, or at Israel, knowing that Israel will react disproportionately. Yeah. Israel goes in, flattens the place for a while. That wins Hamas lots of PR points. Doesn't win them anything else, though. They just have more dead babies in Gaza for it.
And the whole thing is
nuts.
The whole thing is utterly futile. And as I said, I condemn Hamas as much as I always condemned the IRA's violence here in the north, and their actions against Britain as well. Things like Canary Wharf and the Hyde Park bombings and things like that. But imagine the British government had responded to that by sealing Northern Ireland with a wall and then bombing everybody inside of it. That's what Israel is doing here. And I just think that is shocking, because half the people in Gaza are under 18, so they didn't vote for Hamas. Others don't support what they're doing either. But the crazy thing about all of this is every time this happens, of course it drives more support for Hamas. Because as more innocent people bury their sons and their daughters, of course it makes them angry. And you have kids who can see their older brother being killed.
Do they even have the land to bury bodies there?
No, there was one family last week where 25 members of the one family were killed. They don't have the hospitals have been bombed, so they've had to close one of the hospitals. The other one, they're appealing for international aid to be able to re-establish the surgeries and the theatres and that there. So no, the whole thing is just sheer chaos. And the frightening thing about all of it, and the most depressing thing about all of it, is this the third time that we've had exactly the same situation in 5 years. It was the same campaign, as you said, in 2009, in 2012, and here we are again. And unless there's actually a proper and fair solution this time out, and that's not just a ceasefire, it's Israel lifting its blockade against Gaza, so that people can get on with their lives and return to some kind of normality and live in some level of decency and farm their own lands and fish their own seas, restore normal life there. And it's also Israel ending its illegal occupation of the Palestinian territories, which has been condemned by the UN 50 times at this stage since 1967, is utterly illegal. And yet Israel won't move on that. And of course that's what's fueling the anti-Israeli campaign within the West Bank and within Gaza as well.
OK, I do have to take a commercial break. When we come back, maybe you can tell us how you go about achieving that. All right, we'll take a break back in a couple of minutes.
Moncrieff, brought to you by SuperValu Tidy Towns. We believe in local.
53106 is our text number. That will cost you 30 cents. Or you can follow us on Facebook or Twitter. Fianna Fáil Senator Averil Power is still with us. She has been telling us about her experience of visiting Gaza last October. One texter says, remember the Palestinians dancing in the street when the Twin Towers fell? No, nobody's, whataboutery doesn't solve the problem, really. And no one's saying anyone is blameless in this particular situation. Averil, though, is it just a pure, unadulterated political cowardice by people perhaps who could make a difference in this?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it was interesting to see this week the US Secretary of State John Kerry was doing an interview on Fox News. He then thought that he was off camera, and he was still mic'd talking to one of his aides, and he was on camera. He had defended Israel and said that they were using pinpointed attacks to try not to hit civilians. And then thinking he was off camera, he's then talking to his aide and going, pinpointed, eh? criticising it, saying that, like, obviously with incredulity, thinking this is ridiculous, and then he's caught on camera saying we need to get over there, we need to get over there. So clearly behind the scenes the Americans get that what's happening is wrong, but it's happening with their military hardware. The Americans have given billions in aid to Israel, much of it military aid. They send them over all the military hardware that's then used against the Palestinians, and they're their biggest supporters in international organisations like the UN and elsewhere. They constantly stand up for the UN. I think it's interesting to see the difference between, say, Kerry's honest view when he thinks that he's not actually on camera, and then what he would say behind the scenes. It shows, I think, it's the powerful Israeli lobby in the States. They're extremely powerful. They've been documented as they're one of the biggest donors in the States, and if they believe that somebody is soft on the Israeli issue, they've fund all their money to their opponent.
I think traditionally there's always been a big identification among the American voter and Israel anyway. They see them as kind of similar sort of...
But I mean, the frustrating thing is that Obama was elected on a wave of optimism. He even got the Nobel Prize just after being elected.
Bizarrely.
Before he'd actually done anything. A lot of people saying this week, what was that for again?
Yeah, give it back.
But he was elected on a wave of optimism. He gave a big speech about the Middle East just after being elected, called A New Beginning, where people thought that it was going to, that was signalling a difference in American foreign policy towards the Middle East, and that would be more conciliatory and more looking for a solution in between Israel and Palestine rather than just backing Israel to the hilt. And yet none of that has happened, and here we are. Obama's in his second term. He's not facing re-election, so if ever there was a time for him to stand up and do what is right rather than what's political, and to worry about the casualties in Gaza rather than just votes in America, this is it, and we haven't seen that. And I think that's really disappointing. I also think it's very disappointing that closer to home, the Irish government has been really quiet on this issue. Traditionally, Irish governments would have always been pro-Palestinian in terms of standing up. And
minister is about a week in the job.
Yeah, right? but if you look at the difference in language, if you look at the statements that have been put out by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and he's on the record previously as being very pro-Israel, but the minister's statements have also spoken about it, have kind of compared the violence in Israel and Gaza as being of equal standing, which it's not, you know. I think that's the problem. And like, it's wrong. The Irish government has always stood up, particularly because of our own history. We've stood up for injustice and human rights in the world. And when you equate two things that aren't equal, Desmond Tutu had a quote where he said that if you're neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. If you talk about the two situations equally, as Charlie Flanagan has, when on one side you've 600 dead Palestinians, on the other 20 dead Israelis, there's no equality between those two. There's nothing just and nothing reasonable of Israel saying that in self-defence it needs to target children. That's not reasonable. They have a right to self-defence, of course they have, and they have a right to take action specifically against Hamas and to stop Hamas firing rockets at them. But that does not include blitzing the entire Palestinian population and shooting at people like fish in a barrel in the hope that in killing 100 people, maybe 10 of them will be Hamas.
At the same time, though, your IDF, the Israeli Defence Forces, you don't know where the rockets are. They could be hidden anywhere. They are. They have been found to be hidden in UN schools and all sorts of places. Yeah. So what do you do? If you can't, how do you stop the rockets? But
I would say long-term, how you stop the rockets is you find a negotiated settlement with your neighbours, because there will never be peace in the Middle East until there's a proper peace agreement between the two sides. That's been the lesson. The rockets have stopped, and Israel has stopped firing on Palestine in various ceasefires over the last 5-6 years, and each time it starts again because the oppression continues and there's no longer term solution. But secondly, even under international law, countries have a right to act to protect themselves and to seek the assistance of others on bringing terrorists to justice. But you cannot, it is a war crime, it is completely illegal to target civilians in the way that is being done.
The thing that's about a peace settlement, I would expect Sean to be better informed than to say Hamas lobs a few rockets across the border. Sounds like pub talk. Sorry, Elizabeth. They launched rockets, more than 1,000 across the border. They're not very good rockets because the vast majority of them haven't hit any particular targets. And obviously the Israelis have a missile defence system, so they've been able to screen most of them out. I'm sorry, I should rephrase it for your delectation. Here's the thing, say in the Irish peace process, there were many international players, Tony Blair and various Bill Clinton, but various other people from other countries who helped it along. But essentially, it started because people in Northern Ireland, Gerry Adams most notably, and others, started putting out those feelers, started coming to that recognition that we really need to do something here. There doesn't seem to be anybody in that region who wants to do that. Isn't that the problem, really? Well,
I don't know. We saw earlier this year in April, we saw Fatah, which are the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and the elected representatives there, and Hamas forming a unity government. So actually coming together for the first time to try and unify the representatives of the Palestinians with a view to being in a stronger position to negotiate then as a group. Because one of the difficulties has always been that Israel won't contemplate talking to Hamas because they say they don't talk to terrorists. And I mean, you can understand that, but again, our lesson from the north is until the IRA were brought to the table, represented by Sinn Féin, but until that actually happened and everybody was at the table, there was no prospect of a solution. And sometimes making peace means sitting down with people that you resent and that you hate for what they've done. Maybe they've killed someone that you know directly from your own family, but you still have to do that. You still have to reach across the table and talk to them. And that has been one of the biggest difficulties here, is that there at no stage has everybody been at the table, and that has been a difficulty for the Palestinian representatives who have tried to negotiate and have done deals, like say the Oslo Accords. Arafat was then strongly criticised by other Palestinians who felt that he had sold out, and of course Hamas weren't part of that process and then went on to have very good elections then in 2006, because Oslo didn't deliver, didn't solve the problems, and then as a result a lot of Palestinians blamed Arafat for signing up for that deal and then flocked to Hamas instead. So until everybody is actually at the table and everybody is taking responsibility for being part of making the peace, then we won't get anywhere. Yeah,
and in fairness, Arafat and particularly his cronies were fabulously corrupt, and everybody knew it. And Hamas might be a bunch of nutcases, but they're honest nutcases.
Within Gaza, a lot of Palestinians that we met very critical of how Gaza is being run by Hamas. So nobody's blind in all this, and there certainly is, from my experience there from speaking to ordinary Palestinians, is they've no blind loyalty for Hamas either. Hamas are the only people in Gaza who they feel are standing up to them, standing up to the Israelis when soldiers actually arrive and start blitzing the place with tanks. But they are very critical of how the area has been run and that. So they want to see a proper, sustainable, elected system with politicians and normal life like we're trying to build in the north, but they're so far away from that. And I just think the Irish government, given our experience in the north and our perspective on these issues, should be using our role internationally to put pressure on for a peace agreement, and particularly to use our influence on the US, because the US is a major player here.
God love them anyway. Averil, thanks a million for coming into us today. Averil Power there. We'll be back with the news.